good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening. Welcome back to the second day of the symposium. My name is Zhenmian Chen. I'm a professor of epidemiology based at the Nuffield Department of Population Health, University of Oxford. I'm very delighted to join you for today's session. So before I start, I'd just like to make a brief overview introduction on today's session. Next slides, please. So we're going to start with a keynote speech by Mary De Silva on her vision of a future cohort study, followed by two sessions, and one on the strategic planning initiative and implementation plans, which will also involve parallel breakout sessions via Zoom. So you will have detailed information available at relevant time. And then 30 minutes break, followed by second session, which is a panel discussion. We'll have three distinguished speakers from cohort study around the world discuss their undertaking, challenges, and opportunities as well. And then we're going to close the meeting with a summary and also a brief overview of tomorrow's session. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, which Dr. Mary De Silva. Most people are probably quite familiar with Mary. She's from Wellcome Trust, joined the Wellcome Trust about 6 years ago, and now leads the Population Health Group, which oversees the funding strategic development for larger cohort studies, not only in the UK, but also around the world. Prior to joining the Wellcome Trust, she was a senior lecturer at the London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine. And she was educated at Cambridge and received MSc, PhD in epidemiology, London School of Hygiene. After joining the Wellcome Trust, she has played a pivotal role in shaping, developing, and implementing new strategic plans for cohort study. So today we're very pleased to have her giving the keynote speech on the title is Disrupting Population Health, the Role of Longitudinal Cohort Study. Please welcome Mary De Silva.
Hi, thank you everybody, and thank you Zhenmian Chen for that lovely introduction. So I'm really pleased to be here. I'm slightly nervous because the title that Jeff gave me was Disrupting Population Health, which is an interesting title. So next slide, please. Great. So as Zhenmian Chen, I've been here at the Wellcome for about 6 years, and this is really some of my reflections on my role in that organisation, and my thoughts about how we could disrupt the field of population health in a good way to point us more in the direction of improving health. And I think that longitudinal population studies, or LPS, have a really important part to play in that disruption. So I'm going to really focus on LPS as a key disruptor in the field. The big disclaimer of all of this is that these are definitely my views and not necessarily the views of the Wellcome Trust. And therefore, what I say does not come with any promise of funding. So what, why, and how is the kind of broad outline of what I'll talk about. Next slide. I often get asked what population health is, and I think it's actually a really good question. My take is that it's understanding and improving human health at scale, and it's the scale bit that's really important because lots of different research fields try to understand and improve human health. But population health does it through the lens of populations. So what causes disease in populations, and most importantly, how do we ensure that populations' health is improved at a large scale? Next. This is a visual basic description of my job. So most of the people on this in this conference know me through my work on longitudinal population studies, but actually I'm responsible for all population health at Wellcome, which includes health systems, implementation science, clinical trials, etc., not just LPS. So this wheel represents to me all the different research questions which population health seeks to answer. And they are discovery science questions, such as how health works, but also translational questions, as in how do we improve health? And it's a very broad range of questions. You can overlay those questions to be research fields. So, and these are the kind of areas of science which we nurture in the population health team: surveillance, mathematical modelling, complex systems research, health systems research, clinical trials. Longitudinal population studies are considered under the population-based data kind of chunk of the diagram. But actually, I think you'll all agree with me, next slide, that they do cover all of, sorry, go back one. That's it. They do actually cover a wide range of the disciplines which form part of population health. And actually, I'm sure you all work in teams where you have experts from a range of different disciplines trying to answer a range of different questions. And that, for me, is the key reason why longitudinal population studies are really at the heart of population health, and how they can also, therefore, drive improvements and changes in the field. So why does it need disrupting? Next. So these are essentially my three big issues that I have born out of this 6 years of leading population health at Wellcome. And I'm sure that they're ones which are shared with many people. So the lack of diversity in the populations we study is very well known. We spend most of our time and money investigating so-called weird populations: Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. And they are weird because that is not the lived experience of most people on our planet. But there's also a lack of diversity in the topics studied, with a real focus on the biomedical causes and solutions for health, and much less focus given to the social, economic and environmental determinants and solutions to health. The second issue is that I think not just population health, but science in general is too simplistic. And I appreciate the need to reduce, a reductionist approach to create a manageably sized problem that can be understood and solved. But if you never take the step back and understand that that problem is one part of a much bigger problem, and that people, the systems of the body are more complex, and people living in populations are also complex systems. Unless we take that step back and understand where our problem is located in that complex system, I think we'll always struggle to really get to grips with wicked problems. And the third is a particular bugbear of mine, coming from a translational research background. This distinction between discovery and research and translational research, to me, is completely artificial and very unhelpful. So how health works, being divorced from how you fix health, to me, makes no logical sense. But they are often considered separately. There are often different funding streams, different career pipelines, different disciplines associated with the two. And actually, I think the benefits of population health, because we're looking at whole human beings in populations, is you can really merge those two questions together. And I think that's where most scientific advances come from. Next slide. So why, obviously, I've picked on LPS as a disruptor because of the population, the audience I'm talking to, but actually I do really believe that LPS have the power to disrupt the way population health research is done, and to address those three issues that I just outlined. So the three reasons why I think LPS can disrupt is, first, as I've already said, they naturally bridge silos across disciplines, and they naturally cover large populations, so you can have that diversity within an LPS. They naturally include multiple complex systems, certainly the best ones do, where they measure everything from subcellular biomarkers all the way through to the complex systems and the environmental and climate changes that an individual is exposed to. And thirdly, they can be used as flexible research platforms to embed interventions within them, so that you can completely marry discovery and translational research together. Next. So in terms of increasing diversity, this is, you'll all, I know, are brought up to this, the idea of increasing the amount of data we have from underrepresented populations, but also more data from minority populations in well-studied countries. And secondly, to increase the diversity of the scientific domains. So social and biological and environmental, I should have added that to the slide, is absolutely critical, but not just we're going to look at the social determinants of health divorced from the biological determinants, but actually how do the two interact to create the outcomes that we see in individuals. And secondly, really deep multidimensional data in LPS, which go across systems from cells to body circuits, to individuals, to the families they live in, the communities they call home, and the nations they are part of. All of those systems can be measured within an LPS and should be. Next. The second issue of how LPS can embrace complexity. So this is a short list of some of the many disciplines which contribute to LPS and also to population health. And we're all trained in disciplines. I was actually an anthropologist by training. I then changed to epidemiology, then clinical trials and implementation science and policy work, and now I'm a funder. So we're all defined by our own disciplinary heritage and how we view the world through that disciplinary lens. And many people want to move away from that disciplinary lens in order to take in broader perspectives. Next. So this is actually something that we've been thinking about within Wellcome, is how do we break down those disciplinary barriers? And certainly my experience of seeing research done and being in interdisciplinary teams myself is that if you have a problem focus, then it's much easier to bring different disciplines in. So, for example, if we, instead of splitting by disciplines, such as neuroscience or immunology, if we instead split by systems, so how do molecules and cells work and how do we change them? How do systems and circuits within the body work and how do we improve them? How do populations and society work and how do we improve them? All of a sudden, you're then requiring multiple disciplines to answer those questions. For example, you'd need neuroscience expertise in all of those three systems in order to ultimately improve population mental health. Next. And the second part of complexity that LPS can address is this idea that we are in a complex system and that you need to understand the system and have interventions which change the outcomes the system produces, which is a step beyond thinking about individual interventions for a specific problem. So in this analogy, plugging, creating the most perfectly shaped cork to plug the hole where his hand is will just result in leaks springing everywhere else. And I have always felt as an academic that we spend too much time making the most perfectly carved plugs, and we don't spend enough time stepping back and understanding the whole system change that's needed. Next. So the kind of wicked problems that this relates to, climate change, mental health, obesity, they are products of complex systems. And we absolutely need a radically different approach to understanding how to change those systems to produce different outcomes. There is this emerging field of complex systems. It's very small, the methods are very underdeveloped, and the approach is largely untested. But we have to try to improve our methods in these areas, because if we don't, we will not have a chance of solving these wicked problems. And I think that LPS have a really important role to play in driving methodological improvements in complex systems. Next. So the third one is this discovery translation false dichotomy. The great thing, as I've said about LPS, is that you can merge the two together and use your cohort as an intervention platform. And through that, you can then understand the mechanisms. By intervening, you can look at the mechanisms of the intervention to see what changes in the person and therefore relate that back to discovery questions about what causes disease. And I think one thing that we could all do in our LPS is we always in LPS ask about what makes people sick. We ask about risk factors and what they do when they are sick. We almost never ask about what people do to help themselves in their lives. So what coping mechanisms do people use when they feel anxious or depressed? What things have they tried to lose weight that have worked and that haven't worked? What parenting techniques have helped their family relationships? If we started to ask those questions of our cohort members, then we could start to develop an evidence base and clues to a much broader range of interventions which could have an impact on human health. And you could get to some of those interventions much more quickly. Next. So what does the future look like? Next. So these are the three things that I would like to see the LPS field develop towards. They are already great examples in the field of these things happening. So I'm really asking for more of that and less of the older style cohorts. And I think if these three things happen, then my three big problems with population health will go a long way to being solved. Next. So the first one is bigger and more diverse LPS. I won't go through this slide in detail. It will be familiar to those of you who have applied for Wellcome funding for LPS. These are our 6 criteria that every cohort that we fund, every LPS we fund has to meet. And we hope that by funding only the very best that meet these key criteria, we can improve standards across the field and provide exemplars for other cohorts to to aspire to. Next. So the big project that we're working on for LPS, that we've been working on for a few years, really tries to address some of those key criteria, including diversity of populations. And we've currently got expressions of interest that's just closed for an African-led consortium to run the formative phase of this. It really is one of the most exciting things I've been involved in. The idea of having large-scale data from Africa to change health, which is led by African scientists. And the idea is to have a population platform which leverages existing infrastructure and capacity in Africa. And this network of large LPS would have these multidimensional data across all levels from cells to society. And it would enable this unique diversity of the continent to drive world-leading discovery research and also translational research, and ultimately address the disease-specific burden in Africa to improve health and social outcomes. Next. So the second area is problem-focused collaboratories, and this really addresses the systems, complex systems area of population health. So these are often much smaller, place-based LPS, where you have data collected at multiple levels of the systems from cells to society. And they are unique in their deep level of community and local policymaker engagement, which drives both the co-production of data collection methods, but also the development of interventions to test within the system. So it acts as literally a living lab where you can generate and test ideas, all within the kind of closed system where there's constant data collection at all levels of the system. So you can evaluate the impact of those interventions, as well as understanding the causes of health problems. Next. So my favourite example, I mean, there aren't many of these in the world, but Born in Bradford is certainly well on its way to being there. I love their tagline of research that changes a city. Bradford is a city in northern England with a very ethnically diverse population, and it's very deprived. And they started a birth cohort about 14 years ago, and they have deep phenotypic data on those children's lives, but also the family, their schools, and then everybody's connected into this city routine data infrastructure for the entire city of Bradford, which includes social, economic, education and health routinely collected data. And on top of this, we funded them to do Act Early, which is a set of systems level interventions to improve the environments that influence child health around environments, learning in school and healthy livelihoods in the family. And because the data system, the data collection system is set up within the whole system, they can monitor and evaluate the effects of those interventions into that system using their birth cohort and their routinely collected data. Next. So I couldn't end without a quote from Terry, Peter and Jeff, which is that individual cohorts are absolutely essential and wonderful things, but they will never be enough on their own because of their being constrained by size, ancestral origins, geographical boundaries, etc. Next. And the solution, of course, is the wonderful IHCC, which Wellcome has supported for a number of years now. And we really do view it as critical to moving population health into the next phase, where we do end up with a globally connected network of large cohorts with this multidimensional data from generalizable samples of diverse populations. And really importantly, that this data are maximally used by scientists all around the world to improve health. Next slide. That's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mary, for a wonderful talk. It's very visionary and really exciting, and highlights the development of cohort studies and also challenges. I think we all agree. I mean, population health at the forefront of biomedical research, but also there are a lot of barriers, challenges, including the way we design the study, what sort of data collect, how to engage with the policymakers, with society to translate our finding into better health at population global level. It's really wonderful. In the interest of time, we're not going to have any question, but I think Mary is going to join us for the second session. We have a panel discussion and the following 3 talks, and I hope everyone can join and raise questions. We can have a discuss. We're also particularly grateful to Mary over the last many years, but also Wellcome Trust for supporting cohort studies around the world. It's wonderful. We hope to see further support over the coming years. It's a really exciting time. Thank you very much, Mary, for a wonderful talk.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all later.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Peter Goodhand. It's my great privilege and honor to be the co-chair with Jeff of IHCC. And this morning, specifically, to open this session on strategic planning and our implementation plan. So in my day job, I'm the CEO of the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, usually known as GA4G8. We, from the beginning, have been working alongside G2MC to stand up the IHCC, and it was a call from our major funders in the beginning that the two global organizations work together in order to stand up this new important international initiative. Next slide. The session overview is all about our strategic plan and about implementing. First of all, a warm welcome to our new SSC, Scientific Steering Committee members, and I will outline the strategic plan. Eric will take us through a process overview and a summary of those implementation plans, and then we'll go into high-level overviews of the working group led by each of those folks leading the groups, and shown to the right here. And then we've got breakout groups for strategic planning implementation. So a very warm welcome to our newest members of our Scientific Steering Committee, Nikki, Kobus, other Nikki, Raman, Reza, Katerina, and Michelle. You can see a very strong contingent from South Africa, from different initiatives in South Africa, also starting to broaden that global reach into South America, Asia, and the Middle East. So all of that, recognizing it depends on your perspective as what part of the world we all live in. So I'm going to briefly outline the strategic plan. I will say I've lost count of how many strategic plans I've done in the last 20 or 30 years, but this is the first one that has been done entirely virtually without any face-to-face meeting. So what is a strategic plan? For many of us, it's a natural way of doing it. But I think for large, complex organizations, then it's very much a way of organizing our priorities, our energy, our resources, strength, and to ensure that everyone involved, staff and stakeholders, are working towards common goals. But I also wanted to point out that in establishing that forward-looking plan, it also is important that it's living and it can be adjusted. Because as the last 18 months has shown us, with a global pandemic, it would have been crazy for anybody to do business as normal. It necessitated it, but good strategic planning would have left open options and responsiveness to change. So why do it? It creates this disciplined effort. And what an organization is what it is, who it serves, what it does, why it does it. It also makes it, if you know what you're doing and you've set it out well enough in advance, it makes it much easier then to measure how much progress are you making towards that goal. So in one sense, this was, I think, a very strong requirement from our funders that we be deliberate and we be strategic in the way we move forward. But even if it hadn't come from external, I think for an organization like IHCC, strategic planning, well done strategic planning that can adapt to change, is critical. Next slide, please. So it's been a one-year process. I won't go through all these points on the timelines, but there's been significant consultation. It started obviously with ICS3, and over the last 12 months, many groups, many of you on this call, have participated in different ways at different sessions, you've been consulted. This is the first real delivery of this plan, and now it's at a point when we move it from strategic planning and we start to think much more about implementation. Next slide, please. So an updated mission and vision, and first of all, that vision statement. So a forward look, something we want to achieve in the future, a stretch, that when we've all worked together and achieved what we know we can, this is what the vision of IHCC. So a global community of cohorts working together to advance science and improve health for all. It's big, it's a stretch. It will take us years to get there, but it's a vision that can hold us firm in that movement together. Mission, more of a statement about who we are and what we do in pursuit of that vision. So a mission to forge cohort connections that revolutionize population health science by providing sustainable data infrastructure, cultivating collaborative research environment, and promoting policies and best practices that foster connectivity, interoperability, and reciprocity. And it's that sense of that is who we are, and that's what we do in pursuit of the vision. Next slide, please. Within a strategic plan, and then we look at those top right boxes of connecting cohorts, advancing science. I think Jeff shared that with us yesterday. But this real sense that we are doing more together that we can do alone. So when it comes to values and guiding principles, they almost make a perfect acronym, but we have to put an extra I in here. So it's idea. And I won't go in depth through all of these, but these are fundamental to us as an organization. They're statements about the values we hold dear and the way we will act as individuals and as an organization, with this sense of we're intentional, we're going to get things done. We're not just going to talk about it. We have integrity. We will be truthful and honest and transparent in the way we deal with each other and with the external world. We embrace diversity. If this international world, if this global world is going to go, we must increase the diversity, the representation of all communities in this global science. Strive for equity. We know that there are many things that we can do to create more equity and more engagement in collaborative projects in a way that is really respectful of all. And then the last one is audacity. And we don't want to just do what we might be expected to do. We want to have stretch. We want to go big. We want to think moonshot and do bold things that will make a real difference in the world. So they're the values on which we're basing IHCC. And handing over now to Eric, who's going to take you over through a deeper look at the strategic plan.
Well, good day, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here and very pleased to follow Peter and take us into now the kind of a further look into, as Peter has established, we set this higher kind of vision and mission for the future, and now take us into the work to be done and the path forward to implement into tomorrow. Before proceeding, I'd like to just take a second to recognize the efforts of our consultant who was hired, Laura Runnels, who we brought on board to shepherd us through this process. It was, as we said, a better part of a year together, and we just want to recognize her efforts and thank her for her persistence and patience in guiding us through this process. And without her persistent effort, this would not have turned out as successfully as it had. So a shout out and a thanks to her. So as Peter stated, with the input from many of the stakeholders, which included our funders and our members and some industry partners and a reach through the organization, we did pull together 4 specific strategic directions that are going to guide us through the next few years in who we want to become as a consortium and how we want to get there. So the first of which is to demonstrate that the IHCC generates impactful science. And as we go through this, you'll see some parallels to the past. So there's some tie-in to the work that we've done, as well as building upon those successes and moving us into the future. And demonstrating that science is where we provide a proof of concept that the IHCC generates impactful science through an ambitious view of how we move forward, and also recognizing that this ambitious agenda will require the ability to scale and include the diversity that's required to have a global impact. The second of which is to enable discovery and connectivity of cohorts for collaboration. and this is where we facilitate cohort discoveries and data access by enhancing the currently, as you saw yesterday, the IHCC's Atlas. The third section is where we make it possible for all cohorts to contribute to the science challenges and the projects that we take on. And here's where we promote the development or adoption of policies and best practices to enhance cohort capabilities and competencies that will improve the practice of collaboration. And finally, as sort of the foundational aspect, is we need to build a strong governance and operational foundation in order to have this continuous move forward. We've been very fortunate to have strong support of our secretariat, and which we're very grateful for, and a very strong presence there. But not only that, it's also building upon that and that ensuring that we have sustainability moving forward. So just to dive a little deeper into each of those sections, the demonstrating that the IHCC generates impactful science, this directive will be charged to the current Scientific Strategy and Cohorts Enhancement Working Group, chaired by Håkon Arsen and Adam Butterworth, as you heard from yesterday. So it really ties into taking our concepts forward to oversee the launch, execution, and closeout of scientific challenges and projects, as well as the design and implementation of protocols required for scientific strategies. And lastly, coordinating with other working groups. And I think this is a real important point for everyone as we move forward, is that we've had we've stood up these working groups in the past, and they've had their head down and working very diligently to deliver on the commitments that they've made to this consortium. And now we need to think a little more broadly and look at the overlaps between those working groups and how they can complement one another. So regarding to the discovery and connectivity of cohorts and improving a collaboration, this will again be charged to the existing current data standards and infrastructure working group. Basically, to facilitate the interoperability and the reuse of human data, that we'll look at these 4 challenges to address federated data discovery, interoperable authentication and authorization, working toward the harmonization of metadata at the cohort level, and then finally and ultimately federated analysis interoperability to improve research. One of the key aspects here is that we ensure we're promoting good work from other groups as well, including Peter's GA4GH and FAIR principles, and also in alignment with our own G2MC parent organization. So the next challenge, or the next directive, making it possible for all cohorts to contribute to these scientific challenges. Here's where I think we're actually beginning to expand upon the past concepts, where we're promoting the development of policies and best practices, but we also want to enhance capabilities and the competencies globally and throughout our membership through sharing of knowledge, sharing of skills, sharing of competencies and best practices. And this directive will be not only including our current data this should be the policy and biostructure working and biodata working group, but also creating a new 4th working group, which will be the learning, sharing, and workforce development work group. So this is a new concept that is being introduced here at the 4th International Cohorts Consortium, and it's an opportunity for us now to work together to pool our resources to raise the level for all contributing and collaborative cohorts, and improve the ability to share knowledge, to share information, share data, and share talent. And finally, on the operational foundation for the work, this is really building on the strengths of our current secretariat by pulling in additional guidance and support for that staff to make sure that we're meeting the commitments of our not only to our funders but to our consortium overall. And we've we've set up or will be setting up these small subcommittees that will contain or consist of the Secretariat staff who are more closely related to each of these topics, as well as some volunteer scientific steering committee members to help provide guidance and structure to and the diverse thought that's required to be effective. And those three subcommittees will be, first of all, staffing and operations to ensure that we have the foundational support to deliver on the commitments that we're making again to the consortium as well as our funders, to make sure that our inclusivity and diversity and transparency are on the forefront of all the decisions we make, and putting metrics in place to ensure that we're meeting those commitments in terms of our commitments. So that'll be our inclusivity and reciprocity subcommittee. And then finally, to make sure that we're communicating clearly and effectively, and you may have seen through some of our recent improvements in communications. You know, we've included social media platform. Our communications director Meredith Towery and working with one of our new staff members on the Secretariat, Chris Nelson, have done a marvelous job recently, and just including not only internal communications, as well as bringing in effective communication that meets the needs of all the stakeholders of our community as we build and grow. So just from a structural standpoint, to give you an idea of kind of how this lays out from an organizational standpoint, we do retain now these four directives and these working groups as well as subcommittees that support each of those foundational areas. So moving forward, as Peter had demonstrated, kind of up to today, we had this 12-month process to develop our strategic plan and to have this output that we're presenting today. And how do we take that forward? So essentially, it's going to be a series of starting, following with as we move forward in today's agenda with the breakout sessions, that where we begin to set goals at a working group level. So we've laid out our directives. We have the four supporting working groups that will take these forward to put into action. So by establishing, first of all, those 1 to 3 year goals. So taking the vision, the mission, these values and the directives, how do we move that forward? And we turn those into goals and plans. So looking at what are we going to do for 1 to 3 years, kind of breaking those down into workable bits of activity. And then going forward, we'll execute those working group plans for the next 12 months. And then prior to each of the next several or going forward annual summits, it'll give these working groups an opportunity to report back, to review their progress, and then present, present to the consortium and make adjustments. And as changes to directives, who would have predicted that the COVID pandemic 18 months ago, that would have certainly impacted not only our individual work, but our collective work and how we can work together. So being able to review, make adjustments, and move forward, and that'll be our annual cycle as we go through our strategic plan, is to set the goals, do the work, come together annually, report throughout the year, but come together annually at a minimum, and review the progress, present the results, and make adjustments to improve and move forward. So just moving into our next session, just to give you an overview of how our implementation plan will begin and work. The work group leaders, the leaders of each of the working groups that was described before, of the 4 working groups, will present proposed high-level goals to carry us through into the next 1 to 3 years. And then we'll break into 4 distinct sessions through a Zoom link that you should have received in your invitation, and to discuss the merit of those goals and the approach to those goals, and are they distinctly smart? And by smart, we mean, are they specific? Are they clearly defined? Are they measurable? Can we put a metric on it to see how we advance that goal? Are they achievable? Is this something that is too pie in the sky, maybe too far out in the future? Is it something we can really put our hands on and really grapple with now? Are they realistic? So is it again, is it grounded? Is it within our grasp? And then finally, is it time bound? So we should have whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, and are there maybe milestones in between that we can measure that progress? So from here, we'll from there. So each of the 4, as I said, working group leaders will present this high-level view to the overall group, and then we'll break out into those sessions to begin action planning for at least the next 12 months, so that we have something to come back together again as we meet annually at this summit, and they'll present the report back and present on what those results are to this group following those breakout sessions. We do ask that you please hold your questions here as the work group leaders present. They just have a very short time, and really hold those questions until you're in the breakout sessions, so that we can take advantage of that time together. Again, I thank you. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it over to Philip and Thomas.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the overview and introduction. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to talk at the IHCC annual meeting again. If you go to the next slide, I'll be talking on behalf of my co-chair for the Data and Infrastructure Working Group, Philip Awadala, but also should really acknowledge the efforts from Melanie Courteau and Christina Young, who've really been key to sort of the initial sort of achievements and delivery of some of the work from the data and infrastructure team over the last year or so. Okay, so at a high level, what are we trying to do? Essentially, we're trying to deliver interoperable cross-cohort infrastructure, and it's really to enable the overall sort of vision and scientific agenda of the IHCC. And really what we're trying to do is just to enable the IHCC cohort data to be accessible across international borders and to really implement the FAIR principles. So we can break it down into a set of challenges, and these challenges really are almost a sort of mirror image of what the sort of FAIR principles are based around. So findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. The first challenge is clearly quite obvious. How do you find cohort data? How do you discover it? How do you find cohorts of interest if you're a researcher? If you're looking to find controls or disease-specific cohorts or individual level data. That leads to the second challenge, which is all about the cohort level metadata. And for you to be able to do querying or discovery across cohorts, you have to have some sort of harmonization of the metadata and the data dictionaries that describe the cohorts. And we heard quite a lot from Christina yesterday when she was talking about the IHCC Atlas, about how we've been trying to address these first 2 challenges. The third challenge then is all about how do you get access to cohort data, and how do you get authorization to use that cohort data for your particular research questions. And this has been an ongoing challenge for many years, and I think there are many sort of innovations in this area, sort of technological innovations that we hope we can kind of try to enable and speed up this process. And then finally, if you've got access and authorization for the cohorts, then how do you do cross cohort analysis? And we especially have to think about the current sort of model that's being proposed, this whole federated analysis paradigm, where the cohort data is just getting too large to physically move it, especially if you're talking about genetic data. To move it from one location to another, you may have national laws and regulations that preclude the possibility of moving the data. So how do we start to think about sort of implementing a more federated analysis sort of paradigm? So just one slide quickly on sort of progress to date. You heard yesterday all about the work that we've carried out on sort of launching the IHCC Cohort Atlas. We launched it last year. We've continued to expand the content of the Atlas. So I think we've more than doubled the number of cohorts. There's still a long way to go, but it has the content has continued to increase, and I think a really great goal for this year would be to try and really kind of even go further than just doubling the cohorts. Really kind of start to outreach and run maybe workshops with as many of the IHCC cohorts as possible to really try and get more of the cohorts in the atlas. We had a specific collaboration with the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, and that was really great, again, for expanding the content of the atlas. This is an example of a disease-specific sort of collaboration that fed into expanding the content of the IHCC atlas. And really, what our vision sort of is we see the IHCC atlas being a sort of cornerstone for an overall IHCC data science platform. And I'll try to, in the next couple of slides, try to articulate some of that, but I really encourage you to come to our breakout session where we can really kind of go into much more of the details. Next slide. So we are starting to think about a sort of longer term sort of a vision for the data and infrastructure team. I think we've had a number of short-term goals, and the launch of the atlases and expanding the content of the atlas has been an example of a really kind of quick wins that we've managed to achieve in the last year. Thinking about the atlas, I think we want to continue to expand the content of it. We want to continue to expand the metadata model that we're using, this Gecko model. We think it's flexible enough. It's been used in a number of other projects, cross-cohort projects. We think it's flexible enough that it should be able to continue to be enabled to enable the cross-mapping of the cohort metadata to enable the querying. Standardization of cohort descriptors, kind of really agreeing on what that looks like. And then looking out from the work we're doing, but looking out to other cross-cohort resources and efforts. We heard, some of the mental health cross-cohort harmonization yesterday, and I'm really starting to look at how we can harmonize the data model that we're using, the Gecko data model, how we can link that then to other cross-cohort data models, so that we can start to look at how we can do cross queries with other cohort portals. And then thinking about new modes of discovery, so data use and genotype is another, or two other examples of how we could expand the sort of different axes of querying. Then in terms of the atlas itself, using the atlas, how can we expand the functionality? So clearly we want to enable more complex and interactive and API-based queries. And I think we would kind of gather those sort of use cases by hopefully running some of the workshops this year to understand perhaps with some of the users of the atlas or the wider research community, what would be the most useful functionality to add to the atlas. I think we want to start thinking about integrating the atlas with other discovery networks. We're seeing the rise of the focus on discoverability for human data is a huge focus at the moment in a number of different initiatives, be it sort of biobanking, cross-biobanking initiatives, the Beacon network from J4GH, there's an Elixir Beacon network. How can we get sort of integration from the atlas with those other discovery networks? And of course, that is related to the data model alignment as well, and the harmonization of the data models, which is possibly the more challenging part. I think we really want to start thinking about, how can we use the atlas as a starting point? So given you've discovered the cohorts that you're interested in, how can we integrate the atlas into the cohort sort of access processes? How do you, filling in your applications for getting access to the cohorts? There's some, and trying to speed up that process. I know it can take quite a long time to actually just get access to cohort data because it has to go through all the various approval steps. But there is some interesting technological innovations here. The J4GH, who got their researcher ID and passport standard, which is now is being implemented now by an increasing number of human sort of cohort or human data hosting initiatives. Next slide. And then finally, starting to think about the final step here is how do we integrate the atlas perhaps into the cohort data analysis, the sort of federated sort of paradigm for doing cross-cohort analysis. Is bring your algorithm to the data rather than moving the cohort data itself. We're starting to see the rise of various cloud-based cohort platforms. All of us /Terra platform, the UK Biobank is about to launch their platform. The Alzheimer's disease workbench is another platform we had talked to this year. And how do we kind of integrate or hand off, from the atlas then, given the given integrating the cohort accessibility and access and authorization processes, then how do you get a handoff from the Atlas then into those cloud-based platforms for doing your cross-cohort federated analysis? And we really want sort of the Atlas and the whole IHCC data science platform to really be an exemplar for the deployment of GA4J standards at scale. And I think that's my last slide. Yes. And please come to our breakout. And yes, we'd love to talk in more detail about many of the topics I've just discussed.
Thanks, Thomas. So over to the scientific strategy and then cohort enhancement work group, which is co-led by myself here in Cambridge and Hakan at CHOP in the US. So next slide, please. And you can skip on one more, please. So we saw from the strategy that IHCC has put together that it's been nicely presented this morning by Peter and Eric, that there are a couple of major strategic directions that the scientific working group can contribute to. Clearly, the demonstration that IHCC generates impactful science and the specific objective there to provide kind of proof of concept. And importantly, that these projects that we do are ambitious and require scale and diversity. But I think we can also contribute to the strategic direction that the policy group are charged with, or aspects of that, which is to make it possible for all cohorts to contribute to IHCC scientific challenges. And we heard yesterday about progress with some of the pilot projects to date, and something like 30 or so cohorts that are already included. But as Jeff outlined in the start of the summit meeting, there are now well over 100 cohorts. And how do we design scientific projects that can really embrace the diversity and span a much wider range of cohorts? So I think there's a scientific element as well as work from the policy working group there to overcome some of the barriers to participation. So what are some of the specific responsibilities then of the scientific working group in terms of implementing the strategy? As Eric mentioned, it's really overseeing I would say the design, the launch, the execution, and the closeout of scientific challenges. And I think an important aspect of that, as we're already seeing, is not only conducting the scientific projects, but also how do we learn from these initial IHCC projects to improve our processes? What are the challenges that researchers have faced with all aspects of the process, and how can we improve on that as a community and as a secretariat and steering committee to make sure that we get maximum value out of the collaboration that's been brought together? How do we come up with protocols and ways of implementing these scientific strategies? And I think that's something we will talk about in the breakout session. And then importantly, Eric touched on the idea that perhaps greater coordination between working groups is going to be required. There are clearly specific areas that each working group is tasked with focusing on, but these don't work if they're in isolation. And how do we achieve greater integration, which is perhaps challenging in these virtual times, but how do we make sure that there's feedback and there's iteration? So for example, cohorts that have been involved in some of the pilot scientific projects are the ones that have gone first into the data atlas. How do we make sure then that the data atlas is serving the needs of the scientific projects, and that the scientific cohorts and data that are being generated in these scientific projects are feeding back into the atlas, for example? So that's an area that needs more focus in the next 1 to 3 years as well. In terms of key actions that we want to pursue over the next 1 to 3 years, and these are some of the ideas that the scientific working group's been discussing at its meetings. Clearly, we want to help the existing pilot projects through to completion, and we had progress updates on some of those, all of those yesterday. Some of them have been able to progress quite easily despite the circumstances. Others have found barriers in the way. So how can we, as a working group, help to support those through to IHCC publications? As I mentioned, I think we want to make sure we really capture and learn from the outcomes of these, not only the impact of the projects and the funding that went into them, what kind of collaborations were formed? Is there added value? We heard yesterday about at least 2 areas where additional funding has been brought in on top of the IHCC pilot funding. So clearly it's seeding much bigger initiatives. how about capacity building? And as we heard, there'll be a new working group that's focused on some of these aspects, but also making sure that we learn about these challenges and barriers, whether they're administrative or governance or any of these aspects, and how we can help overcome them and free up research. We've heard about the collaboration with the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative in presentations yesterday and in discussion earlier today, and I think that's got several planned phases, and so that would be a key pilot project for us to support. But we also want to see how we can how are we going to generate funding to launch new projects and also build on the pilot projects? How can we make sure that the ambition that we heard about to extend projects from maybe 4 or 5 cohorts to dozens of cohorts? How can we realize that, and where is the resource to do that going to come from? And how do we mobilize the IHCC community to help resource these projects? We talked about bringing in all cohorts. So I think, how do we make sure that we can really engage cohorts from under-resourced parts of the world or low and middle income countries to enhance their participation and make sure it's not just the same cohorts that are well-resourced that are contributing to all of the projects? How do we really get that diversity that is one of IHCC's key strengths? And I've mentioned already about thinking about how we cross-link the working groups better and ensure there's a flow of ideas and actions. Next slide, please. So just a teaser then for those of you who come to the breakout group for the Scientific Strategy and Cohort Enhancement Working Group, we thought we'd structure it around 3 questions that we can have some discussion around. Firstly, how are we going to achieve that aim of allowing all cohorts to become involved? So how can we develop scientific project ideas that allow inclusion of a broader, more diverse set of cohorts? Clearly, there's policy and data aspects to that, but also how do we make sure that we're doing the right kinds of projects that allow wider participation? Secondly, so far the projects that have happened have been either through generous funding from the NIH and Wellcome Trust, and we've run processes then to select projects, or through external funders like the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. But how can we empower you as the IHCC community to develop your own project ideas and also apply for funding using the IHCC as a fantastic resource really to answer the kinds of scientific questions that we're all interested in? So how can we generate a bottom-up funding model as well as a kind of top-down funding model? And thirdly, it's not just cohorts and investigators who are a part of the IHCC, but there are many different stakeholders involved. And so how can we capitalize better on the industrial links that IHCC has built? There are many assay providers, for example, or pharma partners who've expressed an interest or who are indeed members to some extent of IHCC. How can we build on those relationships, and how can we integrate that more into the science that's being done? So those are 3 questions that we'd like to discuss during the breakout session. Look forward to seeing many of you there. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. And as Peter said, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. And since I know we have at least one dedicated West Coaster on the line, happy sunrise, and kudos to you for being here with us. It's a good time of day then to think about strategic planning, so I'm happy to tell you all about the things that we are thinking about within the policy. And if we go to the next slide, systems working group. So that's one change looking towards the future, as our name has been slightly modified from policy and biodata to policy and systems, which I think nicely encapsulates the way that we are thinking about policy going forward and how policy can support and collaborate and facilitate the scientific aims of the IHCC. So next slide. Just going back to some of the things that we've seen previously this morning at, again, a high level, it's, just even looking at the mission, it's very clear to see where the role for this group and the activities of this group fits. Just right there in the mission statement up front in terms of promoting policies and best practices to foster connectivity, interoperability, and reciprocity. So really core to the eventual success and all of the activities for the consortium. And so that's the what of what we'll be thinking about going forward, if you will, but also thinking about the how. We can look to the values. And I think oftentimes the values here and in some of the specifics expressed and shared by Peter, there's a lot of focus on the science here, but I think there's a lot that can speak to the policy activities and again, how we are approaching within each of the different values. I have pulled out different excerpts of thinking about this that I think are important and can help shape what our group thinks about in terms of considering the different activities and goals that we should take on. So this focus on building for the future, disseminating our work broadly, what are the policies and resources to help make sure that we do that, to ensure in terms of our value around integrity, that we are transparent and that fairness and respect for all comers in terms of our cohort members as well as our participants are built into everything that we do as a basis for trust. Again, both diversity and equity as our values are things that we don't think about as outcomes, but again, are integrated into how we do everything in terms of being global and inclusive in our reach, the reciprocity and the learning that we can happen between all of the different cohorts and partners in our different collaborations. And again, with equity, making sure that everyone has that opportunity to participate and to grow and to contribute. And then also just, enhancing many different levels, many different ways to do that. Again, both from a scientific, a technical perspective, in terms of methods or tools, but also from the policy perspective. And then, of course, finally, as Peter talked about, being bold, making sure that even in our policies and how we're thinking about the policies that will move us forward, tackling the difficult challenges and not being overwhelmed or unduly stymied by the morass of legal situations or regulatory issues to be overcome, but making sure to go after them and to pursue them and to encourage innovation in how we are tackling them. So if we go to the next slide, just revisiting again the strategic directions, and we're actually going to move from right to left here. Again, wanting to make sure that we frame our thinking in this working group and in the activities that we will take on in a very broad way. So of course, as Eric mentioned, this strategic direction around making it possible for all cohorts to contribute to IHCC science challenges, that is our direct charge, promoting the adoption of policies and best practices, as I mentioned, to make sure that we are building capacity to improve the practice of collaboration within our activities. But even beyond that, if you reflect back on the strategic directions that the other working groups have already highlighted, even facilitating cohort discoverability and data access. Data access is about the technology and the methods to be able to do federated data analysis, but it's also, as was referenced, about working through the local context, the rules, the policies, et cetera, to make sure that that data access is possible. So very strong role for policy. Same thing in terms of thinking about this first strategic direction in terms of demonstrating that the approach leads to impactful science. There are places in our activities where we want to see proofs of concept in terms of the policy frameworks that can work and be able to move from that specific case for a given project and see what might be generalizable, see how we can expand and scale those proofs of concept into something that can be disseminated and that can really advance work more broadly. So moving to the next slide, you can start to think about what's the framework for how we will work. And again, I also hearkened back to the point that Adam was just really talking about in terms of the interdependency of the activities and the charges to each of the working groups to really now begin coordinating with each other to make sure that we are capturing the opportunities for synergy and also to leverage the work of one another throughout the things that we're doing. And I would layer on top of that thinking about working in terms of our actions within the policy group at multiple levels. So at a local level, at a community level, and then, if you will, at the level of the broader public or the research enterprise as a whole. And so locally, this, our activities, I think, and Nikki and I in our conversations have been very much in alignment with regard to this pragmatic approach of really focusing on how can we collaborate with and facilitate the progress within the individual IHCC projects, whether that's a particular scientific project, such as the pilot projects or the COVID projects that we heard about yesterday, or activities like the data atlas itself, making sure that we are, again, advancing the work in concert with the science moving forward to enable it to move forward, hopefully in a more efficient fashion. From a broader community level, thinking about our sister, if you will, international consortia out there, and how can we work at a more traditional policy level in policy conversations, developing policy tools to enable us to make progress on specific topics, such as we'll talk more about on the next slide, data sharing or privacy issues, et cetera. And then finally, for the research enterprise as a whole, thinking about, again, how can we generalize what we learn in our specific and very practical work to broader communities? Can we not just build resources, but in many cases, maybe assemble resources that others have built in a way that's accessible and easy to disseminate and easy to find for other cohort investigators, whether they are IHCC members or not. Moving to the next slide, start thinking about how does this translate into goals. And so here we have laid out 3 proposed goals. They're still relatively high level, but this is what is our teaser for the conversation in the breakout to really think about going through these and making sure that they are the right goals and that they are relevant. So first, again, at that local level, collaborating with the other working groups to develop project-specific policies and frameworks to advance the activities that are going forward in the different scientific initiatives. And then again, community level, interfacing with, contributing to as well, other international efforts to address policy interests that will benefit IHCC's mission, but also more broadly, the policy topics and interests that we all have in trying to advance issues like data access procedures, reciprocity or interoperability of policies across different cohorts, across different platforms or technologies, and of course also then just pathways, the how-to part of this, how can we address issues like GDPR in our studies, making sure that we are disseminating that information and sharing it with others, which brings me to, again, this toolbox that I alluded to before, to assemble resources. Yes, we may create those new resources where we see a gap, but I think even the act of bringing things together to enhance capacity or provide resources to our membership in terms of other cohorts that may not have the strong infrastructure as others in different parts of the world or who are more established in terms of the maturity of their given cohort, but also for just other cohorts in the community as well, so that collaboration overall across this research domain is advanced and is able to move forward as efficiently as possible to generate the maximum benefit possible for improving health. Next slide. So again, just last slide to provide a little bit of what I hope we can really get to in our breakout session is to think specifically about this actionable framework. Is it the right one for IHCC? It's a little bit different than other international consortia, and I personally think really speaks to the unique niche that we have as IHCC. Are these the right goals? What should be modified? What is missing? Making sure that we interrogate these goals and set them out in the right way for the next few years to guide us. And then to Eric's point earlier, how do we translate these high-level, somewhat aspirational activities into goals that truly are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, as well as reasonable, and then also time-bounded again, so we can track what we're doing and really look back at how much progress we've made or where we need to readdress our efforts. And with that, I will stop. Invite you all to join us, even if you don't think of yourself as a policy person, and turn it over to Ludi. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm and I will present on behalf of Eric Bremer on that part. Yeah, as Eric explained, one objective of IHCC is to make it possible for all core to contribute. all of the working group will cover this objective in some ways, but none was really covering the education and sharing part of this objective. And it's really why the strategic plan led us to create a new working group that will be focused on that. Then this new working group will be supporting that objective to make it possible for all cohorts to contribute to IHCC science challenges. And how we can do that? By assessing a cohort workforce capabilities and competencies and designing activities to address identified needs. But we will also coordinate with other working groups to address workforce needs related to scientific challenges. And the big goal of that is to training also the next generation of cohort leaders. Our proposed goal is for the IHCC to be viewed as the go-to resource for large cohort research. And how can we get there? I think that to get there is really to enhance collaboration and practice and knowledge sharing, like Eric told previously. And this working group will be there to really listen to all of you and to all of the working groups. And in your goals, we want to at least establish cross-cohort exchange program. For example, we would like also to establish membership activities for young investigators and establish an ongoing cohort educational webinar series with additional hands-out workshop and or forum discussion as needed. About the educational webinar series, you may know that we already started that educational platform with a talk from Zhengming Chen in May, and our next webinar is already planned for June 24 at 12 UTC, and our speaker will be Katerina Ferritino, and I will invite you to register for that. I just put the link on the chat, and you can also find a link on the left side of the social platform on the About IHCC. And don't hesitate to register. Our first webinar series had a lot of success, and I think that we really want that working group to be listen to all of you, listen to your needs. Yesterday we heard about the Data Atlas working group that would like to have to enter the data into the Atlas. Then that's also hands-out workshop that this group can help to put in place. Adam also talked about how to connect with the industry partners. Then that is also that kind of forum discussion we can implement with that group. During the breakout session, we can discuss the action plan for this group. That is first to nominate and recruit co-chair leaders for this group. We are presenting at the Secretariat because it's a new group, but working groups are member-led. Then we want you to be involved in this new working group and to participate. Then we will really work on identify co-chair leaders during the breakout session. Also, brand that working group. Do you want to rename the group? What name we would like to have for that group, and define scope and boundaries. We'll also develop processes, what kind of processes to define and understand the gaps in cohort resources, identified resources to support ongoing success and also build knowledge, skill, and attitude needed to do population research using cohort data. Then I'm really excited about this new group, and I hope you are too. I think that's really a group that we were missing till now. Then we really invite you to join the breaking session you have in your agenda. You have been you have been assigned to specific breakout session, and the link is on the social platform agenda. Then click on the Zoom link and join your session. I enjoy and brainstorm together. That's the goal. Thank you. The breakout summaries. Hello again, we are here on the breakout summaries. I will start with next, I guess, with the learning and sharing working group discussion we had during the breakout. Next. We really had an awesome discussion with the team that was present there. A lot of excitement about this new working group and a lot of ideas that came up. It's kind of messy, sorry, but we had so many ideas that it was difficult to put that in a nice slide in the last minute. What has been discussed, it's Albert volunteered to be a co-lead of this new working group, and Zhangming will discuss with some colleagues that would certainly be interested to be co-lead as well. And Nafifi also expressed interest to be in the group, either as a member or a co-lead that we'll discuss later. The objective of the group are really what I presented first, was really learning and sharing, exchanges, sharing expertise. And we discussed a lot also about programs for students and postdocs as well. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, more concretely, the way we were, the group came up, it's really to create hands-on workshops, seminars, symposia, and training channel. But also they were thinking about a cohort curriculum and IHCC summer school in either virtual or live bootcamp. That could have different modules and different levels depending on where the participants are in their cohort. Then it would be either like beginning, if you are just starting your cohort and want to know a lot, or you already start your cohort for a while, but there is still some part that are that you would need more learning and training. Then that was really what was highlighted the most. We were also discussing about having on the IHCC website more visibility of training and educational programs that are provided by the different affiliation of our cohort leaders, but also create specific virtual trainings where we could provide like even certificates to those trainings. We were also talking about prioritize the content on those training effort, but also be able to partner with different countries with different resources. Like low resources country could partner more with countries with more resources to ensure that all the gaps are filled by the program. Also reach out to young investigators community to ensure that they are aware about all those programs and they will take advantage of it. We also were talking about student exchanges and postdocs going for some trainings in other countries and in a specific university that are affiliated to our cohort leaders. We also discussed the name of this new working group, and the team came up with the name of Training, Sharing and Capacity Development Working Group. Then we are welcoming this new working group in IHCC and are excited about what we'll see next. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Great. I'm going to report back on the data infrastructure interoperability group. We had a really great session. Actually, we probably could have kept talking for another hour at least. We had only got halfway through our topics. It was great to see that we had a lot of new faces and names that came along to the working group, which was great to get new perspectives to the group. So I'll try and summarize what we went through. So next slide. So we spent a little bit of time at the start of our meeting trying to look at the sort of core principles for the working group and trying to maybe lay those out and maybe just get a little bit of discussion around each one of those. And ultimately we came up with this list of 7 here. Some of them should be quite obvious, but I think it was really great to actually write them down and sort of agree them in principle. So improving the fairness of the IHCC cohorts, that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Supporting open community standards, all of our work that we do in the data team, we want it to be based on open standards so we can interoperate with as many other initiatives as possible. We really have to embrace the federated paradigm. I've talked about that earlier on. Embrace the heterogeneity across the IHCC cohorts, accepting that the cohorts, there's just a whole diversity and range and purpose and data types and ways of collecting data, phenotypes, everything else from the cohort. So really keeping that in mind in sort of all of our approaches and making sure we have the flexibility to be able to handle and cater for the heterogeneity. We really want to integrate with other existing cohort networks and platforms. We acknowledge that we're not going to have one single solution that's going to solve global cohort interoperability, global cohort analysis platforms. There's going to be, many of these different platforms, and we want to be able to interoperate with as many of these networks and platforms as possible from the IHCC data team and the products that we produce. We want to support the scientific agenda of IHCC. So I think we will try to perhaps maybe have a more regular discussions and interactions with the scientific teams to kind of get some sense of what, in terms of, if we're like, an example might be prioritization maybe of cohorts that are being added or to the atlas maybe, to really see that they would give the best value for the scientific agenda. And then we really want to make sure that we do continue to engage and improve our engagement with the LMIC cohorts. I think we've, from the very start of the analysis or start of the atlas, we have tried to make sure that there is representation, even from the first 5 or 10 cohorts that were added. There is representation from the LMIC cohorts in the atlas. So we had some time to discuss 2 of the challenges. We had, I think there's like 5 challenges. We only got through 2 of them in the time we had available. The challenge that we talked about a little bit was this whole issue around harmonized cohort level metadata, what it means, what it is, how do we move it forward, how do we collaborate with other harmonization activities, example being Maelstrom. The Maelstrom catalog is one of those. We've heard about some of the global mental health initiatives. How do we have harmonization so we can do cross querying with those harmonization initiatives, and perhaps I think there's some strategic discussions that we could have with some of those initiatives to try and see if the data model that we are using if we can have sort of as much alignment as possible as with those other initiatives, and we have had some of those discussions I think already through 2020. So there's a bit of a landscaping analysis to to really kind of get a map of the other cohort harmonization activities and start to kind of see that we do reach out to those and maybe get some discussions with those activities. There are sort of best. The next topic here is sort of the approach that we're taking with the IHCC harmonization activities, and is there recommendations perhaps that we can for new cohorts? Is there kind of recommendations on data models, ontologies maybe that they might want to use if those ontologies have already been pre-mapped into the IHCC Atlas? That would certainly smooth the process for those for new cohorts to be able to slot easily into the IHCC Atlas in the future. Standardizing, creating a standardized set of cohort data descriptors. We talked about going to a bit more detail. We have this. There was a survey sent out very early on from IHCC Secretariat collecting some high-level descriptors of the cohorts. Can we go with maybe one level deeper to that? Maybe looking at maybe the assays, the data types, the different maybe the different omics assays that are planned or have been collected, or are data types that are available, and maybe going a little bit more detailed into more about the platforms and the details of those assays. And that certainly could be something that could be captured and made discoverable through the Atlas. So we'll talk with the Secretary about how we move, where the sort of boundary between the high level descriptors that the Secretariat have captured, and then how that transitions into the data team and the Atlas. And then, of course, we have this initial effort in the last year, 18 months about collecting cohort data dictionaries and harmonizing, but you go a year down the line and you go another year down the line. These cohorts are changing. They're collecting new data. They're doing new phenotyping. We need to think about how we're going to keep the cohort data refreshed and updated in the Atlas. So we're going to have to start thinking about sort of longer term cycles of updating the content of the Atlas. And I guess it's not an area we focused on initially, because we initially just been trying to get the initial version of the Atlas up and running. Next slide. Then we talked a little bit about the whole cohort access and authorization, and how we can kind of link the discovery of cohorts through the Atlas, then link it into the access and authorization cycles that you have to actually be able to actually use the cohort data then. So we talked about, there is some interesting work happening from the GA4GH, this whole researcher passports and visa standard, which is a way of kind of a standardized way of presenting the credentials of a particular researcher to a cohort owner or a cohort data controller to request access. I think we need to work with Team C here to think about this. This has links into data governance and policy, and I think we'll probably have to have some more discussions with that team on this topic. We do need to start to identify some pilots. To really, if there is a particular cohort or a particular cross-cohort initiative, maybe that we can start to pilot some initial demonstrators of this, showing how we can use some of these new GA4GH standards, or being able to really show how we can link from the Atlas to the cohort data access processes. So that would be really, really nice demonstrators to get working. And then I think there's a whole set of kind of, in terms of the Atlas itself, but just using the Atlas as workshops and tutorials that we want to start to develop around sort of, training material, maybe for I guess maybe students, postdocs who are working in the cohorts, and really showing, really kind of starting to develop materials on how they can use the Atlas to benefit their research, I think. Oh, okay, the last point I hadn't even read. I'm just trying to look at what it means. Yeah, okay, so this is about sort of collecting the harmonized questionnaires that have been already harmonized in a format that can read and import REDCap. Okay, maybe modify. Yeah, so this is all about the ingest process of getting data into the Atlas. I think this is we do now have a standardized process for ingesting data into the Atlas, and I think we really want to start running some workshops, hopefully through this year, with as many of the cohorts as possible, to show how it is possible now to get new cohorts and into the Atlas and get that sort of cohort harmonization step. We would obviously need input from the cohorts. Next slide. Okay, great. So this, I think, a real area of focus for this year, I mean, will be to expand the content of the Atlas. We have it's there, it's live. We've ingested, I think, about 13 cohorts into the Atlas. So we've a pretty good process now. And Christina talked about this yesterday with some of the tools that exist. And I think what we really want to do is put together a sort of tutorial workshop, and then invite as many of the cohorts. Maybe we'll run this as a series, perhaps. It depends on, how many cohorts are really sort of ready to engage here. To really support the IHCC cohorts to get sort of onboarded and represented in the cohort Atlas. There is partnerships we can do here with existing initiatives like the Nikki from the H3 Africa Bionet and also the Seneca project, because we're using a almost identical data model. We already have training materials from those projects that we can then reuse as part of this tutorial and workshop series from IHCC. And then I think, we do want to get a bit more broader dissemination of the portal, and maybe from potential users and the research community about whether it's useful, is there particular queries or they would find more useful from or ways of exporting the data, in terms of the users, potential users of the Atlas, and getting some structured feedback on that. And then I think we'll, in terms of the sort of broader outreach to the cohorts, I mean, starting to introduce more details about the GA4GH standards that we want to sort of form the basis for the IHCC data platform going into the future, around cohort access and integrating with the cohort platforms. Next slide. Okay, this is my final slide. We had some action items. I think they're kind of a summary of what I've talked about. Getting this cohort harmonization workshop and onboarding into the Atlas, that's absolutely an action that we've taken and are really quite keen to get that up and running. We had someone representing the European 1 Million Genomes Project, and I think the action from there was to see, how can we check or make sure that project is engaging with IHCC and making sure that we have contact points for that project. And finally, in terms of sort of logistics, we want to, we had a whole lot of new faces and names that came along to the meeting, which was really great. We really want to get regular sort of meetings of this working group up and running, and we'll certainly. I think we need to refresh the membership list for the working group, and perhaps maybe do an outreach to the cohorts to make sure that we do actually have the right contacts for the cohorts for this working group. Yeah, and here is a list of all the people that came along to our meeting and really had some really interesting discussions. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Thomas. So I'm pleased to present on behalf of the Scientific Strategy and Cohort Enhancement Working Group. So we had a somewhat smaller working group, but a range of different backgrounds and inputs, and we tried to tackle the kind of 3 breakout group questions that I'd formulated earlier. I think just to reflect on the process in the session, I think it showed how valuable it is. Obviously, it's challenging in a virtual environment, but how valuable it is that the working groups and the Secretariat have a dialogue with the IHCC members and the community. And I think creating more other forums where this kind of knowledge exchange and suggestions for ideas can happen is really important. So I think as a working group, we'll go away and think about how we can do that better, because having even short half an hour to collect ideas was really useful. So we talked firstly about trying to think about how we can engage members to come up with more scientific project ideas that would allow inclusion of a broader, more diverse set of cohorts. We've heard already about all the pilot projects that are ongoing, but what will be the next set of projects, and how will we allow more cohorts to participate? And of course, the first point that people made was we probably need to identify what the barriers are to participation. Of course, this links well with the policy working group. But in terms of the science, we thought about what kind of scientific projects could one do that would enable more people to take part. Somebody made a good point that all of the cohorts have joined up and are willing to collaborate, but maybe we don't really know what all of the cohorts' interests are, or the investigators in those cohorts. So maybe capturing some of that information about what are the priority areas for each of the investigators or cohorts involved, and then to see whether we could almost act as a sort of matchmaker to say, actually, look, there's a set of cohorts here who are all really interested in this topic. This would be a good area to develop to work up to a grant application or a project proposal. So maybe that would be an alternative source, as well as asking cohorts to respond to specific calls like the Davos Alzheimer's project. Embedded within that was kind of an understanding of why the cohorts have joined IHCC, and trying to understand what they want to get out of it and how we can empower the community to help drive the science. Particularly thinking about, as the third bullet point kind of indicates there, what's the value and the power of IHCC. So we all do interesting research in our own cohorts, but where is the niche that IHCC has, and that's partly stemming now from the new vision. What is it that we can do in IHCC that we can't do in other environments, and how can that stimulate projects and grant proposals out of that? There was also some mention about sustainability and longevity of cohorts, and perhaps it comes back to sort of what Thomas was saying about refreshing and updating. Have we got the right people from the right cohorts involved here, and do we need to think about the next generation, if you like, of IHCC investigators and bringing in new ideas and initiatives? So sort of along similar lines to the diversity, we then thought in a little bit more detail about currently the pilot projects have stemmed from the seed funding from NIH, from Wellcome Trust, and then from the and Chan Zuckerberg, and then from the external efforts from the Davos Alzheimer's. And we wanted to say, actually, we've got more than 100 cohorts here. How can we empower the community now to say there's a huge infrastructure, there's a huge will to participate in international team science? How can we empower members from IHCC to develop their ideas and bring in resource, if you like, bottom-up funding to complement the some of the top-down funding that the Secretariat has sought? Again, there are barriers to that, so thinking about how do we overcome those. So at the moment, we thought about, how do we overcome the barrier that when there were pilot projects to be put together and we had to kind of identify other cohorts of interest. At the moment, that was largely through kind of email. So is there a way to develop a alternative means of communication whereby members of the IHCC can communicate with each other rather than just a kind of email shout out? That comes back a bit as well to what Thomas was saying. We kind of talked a little bit about, do we know what the cohorts are, and do we have a good sense of what data they have, so that there's some, there can be some kind of targeted reach outs, as well as the kind of matchmaking that we've talked about. We talked about the idea that there are already several project ideas that were put together that didn't get funded in the initial round. Can we catalog those somewhere, and can we empower people to build on those, or to revamp those, or to reach out to other funders to those, given that the ideas were developed and the enthusiasm was there? Somebody raised the point that it may be the case that where funding for a funding application for one or two cohorts has failed, it could be enhanced by bringing in other cohorts or expanding into the IHCC. So how do we create a framework whereby people can take their initial ideas and invite other cohorts, and can use the IHCC infrastructure to upscale those? We wanted to kind of really see how we can do better to emphasize that IHCC is there as a resource, as a tool that people can use to propose ideas and lead projects. And probably that's something we haven't shouted about enough. And actually what we've seen, in, particularly yesterday, is that there's a lot of progress that's been made in the Data Atlas group and the pilot projects, and that we can actually build on that now. So for example, a criticism from a grant reviewer may be, how are you going to harmonize all the data from all these disparate cohorts from around the world? Actually, we now have proof of principle that this can be done, and we have the Atlas, and we have the work that the data team have done to show that this is possible. Similarly, with the scientific pilot projects, we have emerging data showing that we can do this in a federated way, and that we can bring these data together. So I think there's there's now emerging proof of principle that can show the power of IHCC, and we need to empower people to capitalize on that. So finally, we thought about a particular question around how can we not only think about the cohorts and investigators, but also the industrial links. And we had representatives from assay providers on the call, and also we thought about things like our pharmaceutical partners, for example, and really thinking about how we can hit the sweet spots here. So firstly, do we have a good sense of what the industrial partners' interests are in being part of IHCC, and how can we try and make sure that dovetails with what cohort leaders and investigators are interested in. We thought one way of doing that again might be through a series of kind of webinars, if you like, so hearing from the industry members and then kind of showcasing to some of the industry partners what IHCC has achieved so far and its potential, so that everybody's up to speed on the same page about where we've got. We've talked a lot about the potential for kind of bulk buying for assays, for example, by bringing together multiple cohorts. How do we work with assay providers in particular to make that happen? And how do we also utilize the experience and the expertise of the assay providers to help us then with pitches for funding to funding sources to actually get the resource to do that? So lots of ideas, and I think one of the things the scientific working group wants to do is to really see how we can better canvass for ideas and how we can make sure we have a diverse group who come to the working group meetings and create opportunities for other people to input in this, because it was only brief, but it was hugely informative to get the views of other people whose voices we don't hear very often. So thanks for those who participated and gave their thoughts.
Hi, everyone. And I think they're going to work to bring my slides up for the moment. I'm participating in 2 meetings at the moment, so I apologize that it's not quite as smooth. But we also had a really great discussion, brief as it was, and I'm very happy to say that we had a nice representation, adding perspectives that we haven't always had in our discussions before, with representatives from cohorts from Taiwan and Malaysia, Iran, who has been very active in our group previously, as well as several cohorts from Africa. And so I'm really excited about the potential that these perspectives will bring to our work and the richness that they will bring to the ideas that we have and how we are developing the goals as we go forward to really meet the needs of the cohorts and of the full range of our cohorts as we work together. So if I can have the next slide, we did discuss as the basis for the framework and how we would develop changes, and wanted to make sure again that this was the right one for setting the tone as we went forward and thought about goals, not just today, but in our conversations over the next few months. And there was really a strong resonance, and I think I heard it in the other working groups report outs too, with this interdependency of the other groups and really wanting to make sure that we are connected and that there is connectivity, not just connection, with the work that we're doing in terms of developing policies, but just even the needs and the ideas that we will pursue and the resources that we can bring to bear. So if we move to the next slide, I think this bore out as the group looked at the proposed goals, high level as they were, there was a strong resonance with the fact that what we needed to do was make sure that we were identifying the needs within these different areas for the different cohorts. And again, the cohorts where they were, not just the identified problems, but specifically what are individual cohorts encountering as they try to connect their projects with other projects, as they try to join IHCC initiatives and have intent, but then when they begin to work through the actual navigation and negotiation around specific policies, how can they make it happen? And that's a push then towards to get, again, very practical in what our group produces and how we connect with our cohort members and these other groups, again, going back to that interdependency that we have. And so if we move to the next slide, we really just began a conversation thinking about taking this to a more specific level of ways to accomplish those goals. And fundamental to that was something that we thought could be very helpful and is a little bit different from how we have done things before, and how, again, I think one of the unique ways that IHCC can serve the policy needs and policy interests for our cohorts and our initiatives. We talked about making sure that there was truly bidirectional connections to our activities and our cohort members. And so talked about the concept of maybe building like a policy consult service or a help desk, but a place to make sure that when a cohort or a project identified a need, that they had an easy way and thought to come to the policy group to ask the question, to ask for input, so that we could connect them with resources that might exist, that we could, again, help them think through the issues, but really have that very dynamic and interactive conversation leading to the specific activities and being very responsive to those needs. We'll need to think about how to scale that and how to do that in an ongoing way, given the nature of the organization. But that's something that we think will be really important to make sure that we are reaching out and able to generate priorities of where the specific issues are. Along with that, we thought we might, rather than just creating a more passive way for folks to come to us, but do the direct outreach to our cohort members and to working groups about the obstacles that they encounter, or the challenges, or what is it that they need from a policy perspective. To assemble a list of those specific issues and then be able to assess them and prioritize them based on achievability, commonality across the different cohorts, fundamental sort of how far upstream are they in a process in order for a scientific project to go forward, et cetera, and then use that as a work plan to begin developing either new tools, assembling resources, again, something to guide us in the work that we do through this group, so that we are very connected to the needs and very responsive to the needs. Another reminder that came up, which is important, and we've heard it within these discussions, I think most every year, is to really make sure that we were thinking about needs related to data sharing or privacy, et cetera, that go beyond just genomic data, but that are really considering all of the other kinds of data within our cohorts and what the specific issues might be there as well, so that we could be well-rounded in the kinds of solutions that we were generating or providing to our cohort members, so that the full range of their collaborative activities could go forward. Another area that we just were beginning to develop, but speaking to the idea of really learning from everyone and being inclusive and reaching to all of our cohorts, was to think about, in addition to the large global cohort alliances that we know about and work closely with, such as GA4GH or others, the Human Cell Atlas or the International Common Disease Alliance, et cetera, but also looking to regional alliances that might exist, particularly in areas with LMIC countries, or where there's not as much infrastructure, where there are particularly knotty issues in terms of being able to move even data, let alone samples in and out, in order to do collaborative analyses and create pathways to even just federated analyses, and making sure that that can happen. And so really being open and broad in thinking about where we might find partners and where we might find synergies in the work that we're doing. And then finally, another area that we were thinking about moving forward on was this toolbox idea, and the notion of using all of these other conversations to identify needs and questions that are asked, examples that are needed for how to, again, navigate an agreement in order to join a consortium or something, how to share data when it doesn't look like you can share data, but really get to what's the essence of the issue. Are there summary results that could be shared? What are the other options to consider? So thinking about building this kind of reliable source for vetted resources that we could make available, and again, that could become potentially a go-to toolbox for folks when they have a question, when they're looking for an idea about how to address a particular issue, and to do that sooner rather than later. So not to try to be comprehensive and complete from the beginning, but based on the conversations that we're having with folks and where those priority needs are identified, to begin putting things together and putting it out there through the IHCC website so our cohort members and others can begin to identify them and use them when they need them, so that they are truly meaningful and can facilitate the work that's going forward. When, again, the other way that this will inform the work that the group does is when we do identify these needs that we're hearing from our cohorts, or that we're hearing multiple times from any different direction, and identify something that might truly be a gap, to use that for IHCC to consider as a leadership opportunity in terms of policy development, or where to pull together, again, our partners and other consortia, or to look to our cohorts for solutions and build a resource in those areas. But again, want to make sure that we're conserving the time and energy for those places where others haven't already created something, and really getting to advance the field in that way by doing ideally new things and not just things that have been considered before, et cetera, et cetera. So I will stop there, and again, really thank everyone that came today to our discussion. I hope that others will be able to join when we're not directly competing with the other groups within IHCC. We will begin also having regular meetings later this summer, after we can reflect on the discussions that we had today. And actually, I'll give a little plug for a session that Nikki is leading tomorrow on obstacles to data sharing, where we're going to use that as a launch point, again, to identify some specific needs. So bring your problems and your thinking hats, so that we can put together some ideas towards solutions. And that'll be something that we'll use as well to start putting together our action items to get working on this summer. So thank you to everyone that came, and we really look forward to what we'll be able to accomplish together over the next year.
Hello again. Thank you all for your participation and engagement into those breakout sessions. We done a great job, and there was really promising action item to implement together, and that's pretty exciting. For the next step, I would say that we will certainly organize a working group co-lead meetings together in the next couple of weeks to ensure that all the working groups leaders are aligned with the objective and action plans. Then we will implement or re-implement our regular working group meetings, and those interested to join the different working group will be invited as well. And our first meetings for those working group will be certainly also in the next couple of weeks to keep the heat from the summit and continue and implement all those action items. Thank you, and I invite you now to connect to the next session in your agenda, and we are eager to participate to the next panel discussion on LMIC gaps and resources. Thank you.
To the last session of today's program, particularly to colleagues from East Asia, which is late in the night, for staying and for participating. So this is an interactive section, so I'm very delighted to moderate the session. As you all know, the IHCC now involve over 400 different cohorts around the world. There are different stages, different size, different settings. They have different challenges. So today we have bring together 3 distinguished speakers representing different cohort study. One from Chile, Katerina, and one Iran, Arash, and one from Malaysia, Raymond. So they can have a short presentation and outline their study, design, achievement, opportunities, and also the challenges in terms of study, sustainability, the resources, etc. And then we have about 20 minutes panel discussion. I'm also very delighted that Dr. Marie De Silva from Wellcome Trust will also join us as a panelist to discuss. I'm now just like to pass on to our first speaker, representing Cohort from Chile. So it's Katerina, please.
Good morning, good evening, or good night. I'm very happy to join this table. Next slide, please. I will present you very briefly the Mauco cohort. This cohort is located 200 kilometers south of Santiago in a poor community. And I will discuss also the challenges that we have in the biobank and data sharing barriers and a little discussion. Next, please. Well, Mauco is a type of population-based cohort. We are located in a small town of 50,000 inhabitants. It's a poor resource setting. Main job is agriculture. And by a census, we invited all adults aged 38 to 74 years to enroll in the cohort, and we would enroll everyone in the household that is eligible. Then in the households, we conduct an analysis of the household conditions, the materials, etc., and environmental situation, animals, and so. And then they go to our clinic that, as you can see to the right, is a small clinic located in the same place of the local hospital that is a low-level hospital for general things. And then in our facility, we do a lot of physical measurements and measure physical condition. We do peak flow tests, abdominal ultrasound, electrocardiogram. Also, we evaluate neurocognitive tests. And then we measure the fat content with impedanceometry. And then we do the bleeding. Also, we obtain urine and saliva, and in some people we obtain feces for our biobank. The objectives is the whole health. This is a cohort of non-communicable diseases, or that was before the COVID, because we now have a very strong COVID part. We also are interested in gene-environment interaction, so we do a lot of environmental sampling in food, soil, air, and water. Next, please. We initiated our cohort in 2014, and it's funded by the Chilean state in a competitive funds. We obtained this grant. It was 10 years, and it's ending in 2 years, and we have to reapply. So in the biobank, we have a lot of barriers, especially being in these low resource settings. We have electrical power problems, internet connection problems. There is no access to dry ice, and we don't have like a dry shipper container to bring minus 80 degrees centigrade samples around the city from the local to the central. The central biobanking is in my university in Santiago, and of course has much more better conditions. We see a lot of limitations, like in the local biobanking and in the local cohort, because we don't have people, experts or technicians to see the equipment, to do the maintenance. And other limitation that we see that we have we are dependent administrative from the local hospital, and in Santiago from my university. So any change that we need goes through a bureaucratic process that can take some time. We also have needs or interest because we have a strong cancer collaborators. We don't have a tissue bank, so this is something that we are interested in being able to incorporate. Next, please. Regarding to data sharing, we also have enormous gaps. We have a very, the funds provided by the state are very few. So we only have 3 people in all to manage all this data information, for instance. And so we have the baseline. We enter everything online in virtual in RedCap. So we have the baseline evaluation, and then immediately people is under follow-up, because we got a connection with the health system, the regional health system. So each time a participant get in touch with the health system, we get the information of hospitalizations and death, and then we can go and check the clinical records. And we also do every 2 years follow-up. So all this huge information requires a stronger data managers and data analysis to improve scientific reporting and communication. And also the data sharing system that we devised with a lot of effort is based on Air Studio. So it's not very friendly on my point of view. So we are very interested in getting help in that also. And the other thing is that we have a lot of studies already nested in MAUCO from all diverse collaborators, national and international. We have a strong collaboration with National Cancer Institute in USA, studying the natural history of gallbladder diseases, gallbladder cancer, and fatty liver. That has been very good. And also many other studies. And we have planned a very nice collaboration with Regeneron to do full exome sequencing of the whole cohort, the 10,000 inhabitants. But we are still we have had a lot of administrative issues to make it a reality. I hope we will solve it. Well, the things that we have been thinking that will help us from IHCC, I found out that we were not able to effectively enroll in the sub-studies that we were interested. And I found that would have been solved if we had like an IHCC liaison with us, at least until we are settled among the IHCC. A liaison that will help us with language issues also, but also to understand what do we have to do, how we have to do. It's like help us to circulate in this new world for us. And also, I think it would be very useful if we have IHCC could help with training and certification of people working in the biobank, in the data bank, and because that is a big need. And the most important at this point is to help us with outreach to policymakers, because this is the first population-based cohort of this size and this complexity in the country. So the authorities and even the scientists don't understand very well which is the rationale of a cohort. And it would be good to have like a stronger organization explaining and showing the potential that a population-based cohort with the biobank will offer. And this is my last slide, just to show you so we used for the census of the households and the participants, we use medical students, and you can see the type of households are very simple. And in the right corner up is the part of the field workers. They have the uniform. They are completely recognized by the community, and we are very active in the community. And you can see the type of population. And well, this is all I wanted to present, and open to questions and discussions. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this interesting discussion about low and middle income countries and low resource situations and cohorts in those situations. Next, please. So I'm talking about the title of my talk today is Middle Eastern Experience of how we could set up and run cohort studies in these situations in low middle income countries. So this is a brief history. In 2008, in Porto Alegre, Brazil, it was the World Congress of Epidemiology, which is organized by International Epidemiological Association. We had this Middle East North Africa regional meeting, and the meeting theme was how we can conduct large prospective cohort studies in the region. And everybody was saying, oh, it's very difficult, so it needs a lot of infrastructure, etc. I'm very happy to say that in 2021, we have at least two very good examples, and more than that, but at least two very good examples of such studies. The Golistan cohort study, both are members of IHCC. Golistan cohort study of more than 50,000 participants, more than 12 years of follow-up. And the Persian cohort, which is more recent, more than 200,000 across Iran, with 3 years of follow-up so far, but it is a new cohort, so it's ongoing and it's representative of the whole country. Next, please. So talking about these two cohort studies, and I'm sorry if this is too small, but I'll explain the Golistan cohort study, which recruited in 2004 to 2008, and that this is the oldest cohort study in the Middle East, as far as I know. More than 50,000 people. It's mainly a rural area out about 400 kilometers northeast of the capital, Tehran. And adult population at baseline, we have lifestyle questionnaire, blood, urine, hair, and nail samples. We are repeating repeat questionnaires at years 5 and 10. We have done 2 so far, so we plan to repeat it every 5 years. A repeat questionnaire, urine and blood collection, and a subsample of about 20% of the cohort to have a follow-up of the exposure patterns. And we have an ongoing follow-up of all participants. We have very low loss to follow-up, a very successful follow-up. Or less than 400 people out of 50,000, so it's even less than 1% of the total population have moved out of our reach. So this is a very successful follow-up of this rural area. We have also been able to establish a clinical trial within the cohort, and this is a paper published in Lancet in 2019 of the poly pill for primary and secondary prevention of cardiovascular disease. This is a combined pill that can be used in places where personalized medicine is not available, so we can use this pill to prevent lots of cardiovascular diseases with one effective treatment, preventive treatment. Next, please. The other cohort is the Persian cohort, which stands for Prospective Epidemiological Research Studies in Iran. Conveniently, the acronym is Persian cohort study, and it's, as I said, it's about 200,000. There are lots of smaller studies nested within this cohort study, like an elderly cohort, a mental health cohort, eye study. I'm not going into details. The study details have been published in the American Journal of Epidemiology, as you can see the citation here, but it represents all areas of the country. Iran is a rather large country, and all different ethnicities are covered. So this is a new upcoming cohort with national representation that we have started. Next, please. So we have been able to make a lot of publications. We are proud of that, and we have been able to build collaborations. I realized I missed a lot of logos there, but you probably can find some of the logos that you know. And this has been a keystone in our research program to build collaborations across different consortia, different institutions, etc. Next, please. So the lessons learned, the things that we learned from this collaboration, that it's possible to do meaningful research in low middle income countries. Novel exposures, new populations, these are very exciting things that come with these cohort studies. And there are hidden resources, and this is what we learned: human resources, materials, etc., things that you, in a conventional way of thinking about grants, about how much money you need for things, you forget that how easily sometimes you can pull up resources in these situations, things that you'd never thought of, and a good collaborator can always help you find those resources. Next, please. And this is an example, for example, of the novel exposures. This is a monograph by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, showing carcinogenicity of opium consumption. And this was made possible because the Gulistan cohort had plenty of data on opium exposure, and we used this for this to inform this monograph. Next, please. So the keys to success. The first one is help the people. We understood that in order to set up a cohort study, first you had to provide the clinical care, and then through that do research. And the health system infrastructure, the local health system, was very fundamental in establishing the cohort, in motivating people to take part. And we gave them like the free clinical care whenever they had a problem. It helped us do the follow-up at the same time that we were giving them clinical care, and that was very effective with the local university and local staff. Build a staff and permanent field station. That was the other lesson. You need that permanent station in the field, in the location, and our biobank is actually located there. And finding the right PI and colleagues, smart, motivated, connected, honest people in the field that can help you do the job is very important, and that's the key to everything that you can do in these low resource settings. Building collaboration. That has been very fundamental. The collaboration with NCI, where I work, in International Agency for Research and Cancer, have been crucial in doing lots of things that would have been impossible to do in these settings. Training and exchange is another key factor, and involving the collaborators, not just looking at the low middle income country collaborators as the sources of data, but trying to empower them by having exchange programs, training for junior scientists or students. That's a key in the collaboration, and avoiding politics, of course, when you're working with lots of these situations. Next, please. And this is the collaboration we're talking about is called Gemini. So as I mentioned, the 3 key institutes, there are lots of other institutes we are working with, but the NCI, DDRI, and IARC, WHO IARC are the key collaborators. Next, and Gemini stands for gastroesophageal malignancies in north of Iran. That was the basis of this collaboration at first, but now we are doing a lot of other non-communicable diseases in addition to gastroesophageal malignancies. Next. So the challenges, follow-up in rural areas have not been easy, but as I mentioned, we have less than 1% loss to follow-up, and nothing helps like your local health worker, motivating them, working with them to go and find these people. The telephone lines are very helpful, and in addition to that, whenever we cannot find somebody or ask them to come to give us information, the local people who have direct contact with these with the participants are very helpful. Biobanking is always an issue. We heard Katerina's talk. What we found out at the beginning of the study was that we established a local biobank in the center, as opposed to shipping everything to Tehran, to the capital, keeping half of the samples there in where it was. And the other thing that we learned was that whenever we had challenges, we split the samples. So at the beginning of the study, we stored half of our samples in Lyon in France at the International Agency for Research and Cancer, which was IARC, which is, as I said, was a crucial part of this collaboration. And this splitting of the samples helps us a lot whenever we need samples shipped to Europe. We have a station in Europe. And also when we were short of freezers for urine samples because they were taking a lot of space, we ship them to US, to the National Cancer Institute, where we keep them. So splitting the samples sometimes is a very crucial, very helpful in these situations. Database management, we have dedicated database managers. We're trying to empower them to do the database management. We have all these challenges about internet, as Katerina also mentioned, but you have to be creative at times, like whenever the internet is not working, just copy the data on the DVD and send it on a card to the database manager. Those are the things that you have to be creative and do it. Funding is always a challenge. We have been able to secure funding for the local work, for the field stations, etc. But always these high-tech lab tests, etc. We really need to be to have more resources for the fundings for the omics studies, etc. Next, please. And so how IHCC can help, we think that collaborative projects investing in high tech, like breaking this exclusive club of omics, trying to generate these kind of data. We have the samples. We'll be very happy to collaborate with other places. As an example, the IHCC Nightingale metabolomics study, which was made possible through IHCC and NIH funding, and helped us a lot to generate at least part of this metabolomics data in our cohort. So we would love to participate in lots of these collaborative studies, but for example, genomic data and most of our subjects are not available. So any collaborative project that can help us generate these kinds of data, we'll be happy to participate and work. And training opportunities, I think exchange programs, training opportunities for lots of these cohorts help the cohort to study the local low resource situation to be empowered really, and the local collaborator can do the rest of the work. They are motivated, they're excited to do this kind of work. Next, please. And this has been made possible, as I said, through a great team of collaborators, but I have to specifically thank Dr. Reza Malekzadeh, who is now part of the Scientific Steering Committee of IHCC, who made all this possible. None of this would have been possible without Dr. Malekzadeh's effort and real true devotion. I have 2 slides showing photos of the field work, just to get a taste of what it looks like the questionnaire, the nutritional data, pictures, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me to share our experience with the Malaysian cohort. Well, that's our sort of cute logo showing our slogan, which is our gift to the future generation. It has, of course, depicts the DNA strand in an abstract manner, showing the application of omics. That would be our ambition to look at a gene interaction and gene environmental interaction as well. Next, please. We started our recruitment in 2007, and we reached our targeted 100,000 participants in September 2012. In fact, we recruited 106,000 then. Malaysia has a population of about 32 million. It is a multi-ethnic population. As you can see, the proportion of participants there, Malays 44%, Chinese 33%, Indians 15%, and others. We oversampled the Indians purposely to ensure that we have a good representation of that particular ethnic group. The colored dots represent, each one of them represent a participant. This is mapped using the GIS mapping according to their address. And of course, with the recruitment and biospecimen collection, we set up our biobank, which is now the largest in Malaysia, collecting blood or storing blood and urine from these 100 over 1,000 participants. So we continued to collect a bit more during our follow-up phase. So up to date, we have nearly 120,000 participants. As with the other cohorts, we have a questionnaire which is sort of digitized. Data is collected straight away from the interview into our database. The usual demographic questions, medical, surgical history, occupation, lifestyle, diet, and so on. Again, the usual measurements of weight, height, BMI, body composition, BP, ECG, cardio-ankle vascular index, spirometry. We have recently added a retinal scan and also a DEXA scan to look at adiposity. Biospecimens and tests, we followed the UK Biobank protocol strictly. Hence all the fractions from the blood and urine. 3 years ago, we started to collect stools during the follow-up. And as the tests that we've done on the participants include fasting blood sugar, fasting lipids, renal profile, full blood count, HbA1c, urine albumin. Just a note on the mortality up till now, 7,575, about a 6.3% since recruitment. Just to highlight the potential of the Malaysian cohort due to the multi-ethnic representation of the participants. If we just take this example of type 2 diabetes, you can see the differential prevalence between these ethnic groups. And of course, this gives a lot of opportunity for looking at genetic variants that give a different risk of getting not only type 2 diabetes, but for other diseases as well. We have done also studies on this on hypercholesterolemia as well. So just to highlight some of the recent research projects that we have completed, a GWAS study on diabetes comparing the 3 ethnic groups. We also did a community-based seroprevalence studies of Nipah and Zika virus in communities sort of when this was very topical and relevant. We've just completed last year a community-based seroprevalence study on hepatitis B and C, and this was at the request of our own Ministry of Health that wanted to measure the burden of exposure to hepatitis B and C, of which none of the agencies had this kind of data and the kind of biospecimens that we have. 2 large ongoing studies under the MRC UK grants, one with the University of Oxford looking at adiposity between the 3 ethnic groups, because we wanted to sort of show the evidence that the distribution of visceral fat and peripheral fat are different between Asians and Caucasians, and we know that's happening, but we wanted a more definitive evidence as well as between the ethnic groups. And then the diabetic study focusing on cardiovascular risk factors using the retinal scan as well as combining genotyping as well. This is with the University of Dundee. So the challenges, I think quite similar with the other 2 cohorts that have been presented. Sustainability, this project is funded through every 5-year cycle. For me as the project leader or the PI, I have to defend this through many levels of committees to show the return of investment and the potential of future research and collaboration before I get a new or a fresh 5-year funding. Secondly, there's a lack of funding for large-scale genotyping because our current funding sort of approaches limit our funds for such projects to about 5 to 10K participants. There have been offers from external parties, including international companies, to sponsor this, just like the UK Biobank. We are still negotiating this. International collaboration, one of the questions that has been raised, and in fact I raised this issue as well at some meetings. Our consent does not cover transfer of data or biospecimens abroad. Hence, this needs to be sort of maneuvered with our ethics committee as well as with our funders. Follow up, well, I'm very impressed with both Kaduri and the Iranian, the cohort in Iran, because our cohort is spread throughout Malaysia, throughout the country, and people move and people change phones and so on. But I have to say that we have achieved a good 60% successful follow-up, complete with measurements as well as biospecimens. Events that follow up mainly by self-reporting. There's no wide implementation of the electronic medical record system. Hence, we have to rely on the self-reporting in terms of medical events and also the complications of the diseases, as well as backup by the list of drugs that they are taking. Mortality cause, about 30% of our cohort participants died not at the hospital, died at home. Hence, we are embarking on a plan to do verbal autopsy to validate the cause of death in this 30%. Yes, that's all. I think I'll just echo my expectations, the same as with the other two speakers in terms of joining IHCC to participate in specific projects, as well as to benefit from technology transfer, as well as other technical capabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for excellent presentations. I found it's really fascinating. There's wonderful opportunities. I mean, a lot of study has just matured, started to produce really exciting findings, including study in Malaysia, Iran. But there are also a lot of challenges. Some are common, logistic issues, resources issues, funding issues, training issues. So I think what I'd like to do is actually ask questions to Mary De Silva from Wellcome Trust, especially on the training. We have a lot of discussions, capacity development. So from funders' perspective, how this can be sort of tackled, because study is going to continue. We need to train young generations, to handle data. Is there any kind of strategies within the Wellcome Trust to help this area as well?
Yeah, sure. Raman, would you mind muting your mic?
Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. I want to reiterate thanks for those really interesting talks. In terms of training, this is a perennial problem with every type of study that we fund in Wellcome. And our approach has been to have a lot of fellowships that we offer, essentially. So individual fellowships, which are competitively applied for, but are really well nested within cohort studies in particular. I think it's harder to build in the kind of large scale capacity building into the core cohorts, because most funders don't fund the core cost of cohorts. You have to, as you know, keep going for these cycles of funding, largely based on the research you're going to generate rather than funding the core cost of the cohort. And that's definitely the approach that we try to stop doing with our longitudinal population studies funding at Wellcome, where we were funding the actual resource, and you could much more flexibly then use your money that you got for that resource as you saw fit, which would include capacity building if that's what was needed. I think the other area is training bioinformaticians and training data scientists, absolutely critical for longitudinal population studies. And again, a cohort of people that's very hard to get funding to train. And it's quite hard when we have, for example, data scientists applying to us in open competition for a fellowship up against, a wet lab person in a clearly defined lab. So we certainly within Wellcome, we try to recognise our desire to train data scientists and bioinformaticians and make sure that they're not disadvantaged in our panels. And we also have a data science and health new kind of area within Wellcome, which is particularly focused on advancing data science methods and training, particularly in low and middle income countries, as we do recognise it's a massive area where more capacity building is desperately needed.
Thank you very much. Another areas of potential funding, I mentioned very briefly, is funding with industry. I mean, not these sessions, but previous sessions as important strategies. I'd just like to ask the panels, are there any kind of effort or constraints from your sort of study design, the consent to prevent you from doing so, especially for turn sample into assay, like LMIC genotyping, because that's still very expensive. Yeah. Katerina, yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, it's very challenging. I am afraid to say that we have been very slow we have been negotiating the collaboration with Regeneron for 2 years or more. So there we also need, IHCC could help us navigate this conversation because it's very complex. Big industries have their own lawyers. So we have to go, our cohort is under a research center run by the two main universities in the country. So we have to go with a contract with each university. That took like a year to get the university lawyer because they didn't understand. I said, this is so important for us because in the agreement says that, both were owners of the data, and they thought that was not fair. And I said, this is the only way we will ever get this information. You will never fund this with Chilean funds, never. So it took like 1 year the lawyers in one university, then the other. And when everything and the ethics was okay, according to our criteria and according to our ethical committee. But when we went to the last stage at Regeneron, then their lawyers begin to question that we had some exceptions because in the last years there was a new law in Chile, an ethical law that is focused on clinical trials. So it is for clinical trials and requires insurance. It's very complicated. And so what happened with the ethical committees for an observational study, population-based study, where the patient is not enrolled in a hospital, but in their homes, they don't ask us to fill one of the law that says the head of the institution, of the hospital, has to sign because we don't have a hospital. And then the US lawyers say, but in the law, it doesn't say that this can be decided by the ethical committee. And then I have 1 year trying to get the Ministry of Health signing that this is okay what we did, because it's the same the Ministry of Health does for the National Health Surveys. But I just want to tell you that.
Yeah, I think we all have a very similar experience. I think this is some area I think the IHCC can also help. Establishes a common framework. UK Biobank is probably the study with the best kind of experience. And in Kadoria, our study will also try to develop the same framework, so that can be relevant to other study. I'm not sure whether Raymond, you have any comments on these particular issues.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that Katharina shared her experience with Regeneron. We're just starting to discuss with them through the introduction by our colleagues in Oxford. But apart from that, I've been approached by some, at least one or two venture capital companies that are keen on investing in life sciences. We're still negotiating there, but as you know, it's always end up with a big win for them and a small win for us. So that's ongoing. And also another diagnostic company that are looking to develop biomarkers, especially for early detection of cancers, because as you can see, we've got a lot of pre-diagnostic samples of people who have died of cancers. This is very valuable. And of course, again, the terms of engagement, like you said, I think that IHCC maybe can provide that kind of advice, especially with Kaduri and UK Biobank. And I think the legal contract is also important, because not many lawyers are experienced in terms of life sciences contract, especially related to letting go of such valuable specimens, especially when there's a potential to discover biomarkers for early detection of not only cancers but other diseases. That's where I am now.
Yeah. I'd just like to pass on to Arash. The audience raised similar questions, especially on the blurred boundary between clinical service provision and research in low-middle countries, and how one can help each other, because this is very often the case, in resource-poor settings. Yeah, I don't know whether you have any comments, experience.
Thank you very much. Yeah, first, let me comment on the question about industry. In addition, I agree very much with what Rahman and Katerina mentioned, and IHCC does provide that framework for collaboration whenever is needed. I would appreciate if others mute their mics Sorry. And the experience we had was not only, Iranian university had difficulty absorbing industrial money, but here at NCI, even if the money, the good example is this Nightingale project we had, and there was a discussion, if we have money coming into NCI, it's very difficult to find a way to use it, actually, because it's a government institution. So we said, if IHCC manages everything, we'll be happy to send the samples and provide everything. So this is really a good mediator, let's call it. IHCC can be that mediator for a lot of these activities, as others also mentioned. And there were two questions addressed to me. One was about the clinical work and research. I have to maybe elaborate on that. So what happened in Golestan, and I don't know if it is repeatable in other places, but this is the experience we had. And also our team had the same experience in China when we were doing esophageal cancer studies there, was that we worked with the local hospitals and local gastroenterologists and said, okay, our cohort participants will have a card, and this card gives them priority in getting clinical services whenever they come, etc. And the cohort team, although they are not, we don't have 24-hour gastroenterology team there in the cohort, but they will be, there are nurses, there are healthcare workers there who can refer them. So it's like, even if it is not, maybe these people, if they go to the hospital themselves, they will get the service, but the feeling that they belong to a team, they belong to somewhere, there are people who care about them. It's not just, they don't want to draw their blood and store them and then, get their data and analyze them, but it's part of a bigger community, let's call it, that has helped us navigate the challenges of follow-up and getting people motivated to participate in the study. There was a question about avoiding politics. Cindy, I think, posted that. Maybe I should have been more clear. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I agree with you. Leveraging politics in order to be able to get advantage and use the politics in favor of the science. What I meant was trying to not to let politics get in the way of science and try to navigate through these challenges there. And if you are a scientist in US working with 2 Iranian cohorts, that's definitely the skill that you need. And training, I'm sorry, because I'm trying to catch up on some of the discussions. Training is, again, I think, is the pinnacle of the collaboration we've formed. I came to the US 10 years ago, part of a training program, and then I stayed here at NCI. So I'm really grateful to the fellowship program at NCI to be so inclusive and helping people from different backgrounds to get in. And that's something I think that we should be promoting more. Thank you.
Yeah. I think in the interest of time, can I just one question and then each of panel answer very briefly. So one thing, if you got given like $10 million, which thing you want to do? Just quickly, which one particular thing you want to do? Yeah, we just start from Katerina. Yeah.
Well, I think I will hire a full team of data scientists and epidemiologists and statisticians to begin to analyze our data and make it friendly for the users and show the results that at this moment we cannot do.
Yeah, so you have a data, but you need staff support to turn into science knowledge. Yeah, and Arash, yeah. Yeah,
I would definitely genotype everybody in the cohort. So that's a challenge we have. Lots of these collaborations we would love to contribute. Do you have the genotyping data, everybody? And I have to add something related to the industry collaboration you mentioned. Some of the interests of the industry do not really align with the science that we are trying to do. And this is, we have a cohort where the major cancer is esophageal cancer and gastric cancer. And these are not very sexy cancers for industry. So that if you give me $10 million, I will genotype everybody.
And Raymond?
Yeah, I'll do the same, yes, of course. Yeah. Same with Arash, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Mary, are there anything you want to add or reflect? Give us a discussion. I mean, unfortunately, we can carry on, for the next hour or so.
No, I mean, my reflection on the genotyping is I absolutely agree with that, and also the need for data scientists. The genotyping is harder because it's so expensive. So I think if IHCC can come together to negotiate bulk rates with industry for changing samples into data for any kind of omics, that would be transformational for LMIC cohorts in particular. I will continue to fly the flag for diversity at Wellcome, particularly in terms of genotyping existing cohorts of diverse populations. That should be our absolute #1 priority for investing in cohorts. And we'll continue to do the work on the data science capacity building so that we can actually turn this data into health impact.
Thank you very much. I think I agree entirely. And if I got the money, I would do genetic because it's so well advanced in terms of value, sort of for money, etc. But on the other side, omics are coming. They're still very expensive, proteomics, metabolomics, but they are coming. Within the next few years, the landscape will be very different. I mean, one thing we haven't really discussed, but I think hopefully we have opportunity is how to do this kind of cohort-wide assay versus very selective disease-based case control, which is a pain. I don't want to get into that. I mean, we have tried a few times. We said no, stop it. It's just a pain. Not just money, but also the way design studies, the batch effect, depletable samples use, all sort of issues. I'm sure you will have a similar experience, but I think the key strategy will be to turn sample into data, not just for a small subset, but the whole cohort. I mean, that would be really wonderful. Multi-dimensional data, all the integrated. Okay, I'm sorry, we don't have much time. We'll have to close the session. So thanks very much again, everyone, for participating in the session. And for stay very light, especially colleagues from East Asia countries, probably very late in the night. I think we have a very, very wonderful sessions today. From Mary's talk highlights the strategic need development. We all agree, cohort study. It's never been a better time to study epidemiology or population health. We used to be very small. We don't want to collaborate because we don't have a data, but now it's totally different. This is really exciting. I think that, I'm very glad, within last just few years, the IHCC has totally transformed the landscape. To address global health problem, we need to have a global approaches, global strategies. I think I'm very pleased to see, we're coming together very, very nicely. Through the discussion, there's a lot of strategic development action plan over the next few years across a number of areas. Some pipeline development, platform, data access sharing, some policy, and some are more to do with the training. I'm sure this can lead to much better kind of a work environment for all of us. And then we have this wonderful short kind of panel discussion from 3 cohort studies, highlight some of the challenging issues. Some are actually not unique, but some are unique to specific settings. We have a really good discussion on issues related to training, related to data sharing, policies, etc. So overall, I think I really enjoyed the session today. I've learned quite a lot. I will really looking forward to continue to work with you and through IHCC over the coming years and the decades. So I think I'd just like to thank all the participants and also our keynote speaker, Mary Dissot from Wellcome Trust, and the colleagues from all over the world for staying late, for participating, and also including the last sessions. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. The last day, we have again very wonderful sessions. So we have 2 keynote speech, including covering issues on the need for diverse cohort in Africa, for example. We'll also have sessions on COVID-19. With a closing keynote by and Francis Collins as well. So hopefully all of you can stay and participate in tomorrow's sessions. And with that, I just wish you a good day and see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.